Good morning and welcome to United Way for Southeastern Michigan's virtual town hall. My name is Audrey Walker and today we will be joined by Dr. Weinman with Henry Ford Health System to share information about the COVID-19 vaccine and answer some questions. Make sure to put your questions in the Q&A box if you're watching on Zoom or the comment box on Facebook. We'll get to the questions at the last 10 minutes of today's town hall. Now I'd like to give a warm welcome to United Way's Director of Health Initiatives, Esperanza Cantu, to say a few words.
Thank you, Audrey. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. The COVID-19 pandemic has lasted so much longer than many of us anticipated. The release of new vaccines has brought renewed hope that soon we will be able to spend time with family and friends once again. But along with the release of these vaccines came myths and misinformation. We want to make sure everyone in our community has the most up-to-date information that is accurate about the vaccines. That's why we are honored to be joined today by Dr. Allison Weinman, who can share information about these vaccines, dispel some of the myths, and answer your questions. Dr. Weinman is an infectious disease physician at Henry Ford Health System and the medical director of its antimicrobial stewardship program. Dr. Weinman leads Henry Ford's immunization committee and played a key role in its preparation and response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Weinman earned her medical degree from Monash University in Australia and completed additional training at Monash University and a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Weinman, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for the great work that you guys do. It's really appreciated. I'm very happy to take questions. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about the vaccine. If I could have my slides, please, that'd be great. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we get asked the most is what was it that sped this vaccine development up? What's different? So normally what happens is that scientific data is held very closely to whoever discovers it. And in this case, the COVID vaccine genetic code was known as early as last January, so more than a year ago. And usually what happens is a manufacturer gets an idea, a concept for a vaccine directed against a certain disease, and they don't put up the money to make the vaccine, of course, until they know the vaccine is safe and effective. What was different in this case is that the government put up the money in the case of Moderna and supported Pfizer. And so the vaccine was ready to go as soon as those trials were completed. In terms of the site, and as well as that, the clinical trials were done at many sites internationally because you've got to wait and accrue a certain number of individuals, which are usually in the thousands. And so that was all done, and it was able to be done quickly. The average number of participants in a usual vaccine is about 21,000. In this case, it was over 60,000. So many more people had received these. I'm going to focus mainly on Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. The messenger RNA vaccines, they were trialed on many more thousands of people than are usual. As terms of the scientific review and safety and efficacy, that was just the same as our usual process. So the FDA looked at it, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, so the CDC, independent scientists, infectious disease doctors. The ACIP meetings are open and available to the public. We all had many meetings with the FDA and the CDC. And we wouldn't be endorsing the vaccine, nor would I have taken it myself, nor endorsed it to others if we weren't convinced of its safety and efficacy and that no corners were cut at all with those two important issues. Next, please. Okay, so, we started vaccine distribution with Pfizer, and then Moderna came a little bit later. I want to talk a little bit about the messenger RNA vaccines because I know that the whole concept, it sounds scary to people. So this is not new technology. It's new to us because we've never had a vaccine that's available to us that had messenger RNA vaccine, but it's not new technology. It's been around for about a decade. So it's actually kind of old in terms of scientific discovery. It's been used for a long time in immunotherapy for cancer, the very same technology, so nothing different about it. So our own body makes messenger RNA, and what messenger RNA does, if you remember back to biology, is it gives you the code to make proteins that your body needs to do different things. And so what happens is the vaccines are a little tiny code of messenger RNA, and it's not the whole vaccine. So in the usual vaccines, it's the whole viral code that's usually altered in some way to make it weaker, or it's dead vaccine. In this case, it's only one little portion of the coronavirus called the spike protein, which the vaccine targets. And what happens is you get injected with a messenger RNA, which isn't very stable. So it has to be sort of coupled with a fat globule. And then it goes into the cells, particularly the muscles where it's injected in the local lymphocytes who do the work. Now, it's really important to mention that the messenger RNA does not go into the nucleus where the human DNA is. And people are very worried about that, and understandably so. But they're quite separate entities. So the messenger RNA stays in the outside part of the cell, never interacts with human DNA. It's impossible for the whole virus to be read, so you can't get infected from this. It just codes for the spike protein. And then your body makes the spike protein, which doesn't cause any infection. And then your immune system says, wait, that shouldn't be here. And it makes those proteins called antibodies that actually protect you then, so that when you're then exposed to COVID-19, your body would have antibodies prepared and ready to go to protect you against the virus. So that's how it works. Next, please. So this is important to note that these vaccines are not licensed or approved. They're released under what's called an emergency use authorization. And that's really important to know because it means that we can't just give out vaccine however we want. We are under regulatory requirements, both at the federal and state levels, to administer it in the priority phases that have been decided upon. So that's why certain people can get access and certain people can't. So there are other vaccines that are pending. AstraZeneca is coming along very soon. You've probably heard about Johnson & Johnson or the J&J vaccine, which is one shot, and they work differently. They're coupled to an adenovirus, a common cold virus. And Novavax is also coming along that has a different technology called recombinant spike protein nanoparticle. Sounds very fancy, but again, they're all targeting this very important spike protein. Next, please. Okay, so Pfizer and Moderna, we said they're both messenger RNA vaccines. They're just two different time periods between the two doses, which are recommended 21 and 28 days respectively. There is a grace period of 4 days on either side to allow for weekends, holidays, difficulty with access. But if it's more than 21 or 28 days, there's no recommendation to repeat the dose. The CDC recently said that as long as 6 weeks would be reasonable without repeating the dose. But if you can get the vaccine, it is strongly recommended that you get the vaccine in those time intervals, because the sooner you get it, the sooner you get that extra bump in immunity. Pfizer has a smaller volume, Moderna has a bigger volume. At the first dose, and remember, it takes about 2 weeks after each dose to get the maximal effectiveness. So both are about 50% effective at around 2 weeks after the first dose, which is pretty good. And that was the target originally designed by the FDA, that they weren't going to release it unless it was at least 50% effective. But look at that incredible bump you get if you get your second dose, 95% effective. And that's extraordinary for a vaccine. We only have about one other vaccine, the measles vaccine, which is about 97 to 98% effective. For example, flu vaccine, which we tout every year, is only about 20 to 60% effective. So this is a really effective, shockingly, amazingly, great news, effective vaccine after the second dose. Unfortunately, pediatrics were not studied. They are being studied now. And so that's why the Pfizer vaccine is only released for over 16 years of age and 18 years for Moderna. Next, please. Okay, so who can't get the vaccine? It's really simple to remember. If you had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients, nothing else. What we are currently doing at Henry Ford Health System, I think a lot of other people are doing it, we're looking at personally, we're having physicians look at all of the adverse reactions and making recommendations about whether it's safe for people to get the second dose or not. And we're doing that for the community as well, who are vaccinating in our mass vaccine clinics. So if you have a severe reaction to any other vaccine or any other injectable medication, so you got intravenously through your veins or through your arm and into your muscles, then it's recommended you can still get the vaccine even if it was a severe allergy and you needed, you anaphylaxed where you had trouble breathing. But the recommendation, instead of monitoring for 15 minutes, which is usual for everybody else, that those folks would be monitored for 30 minutes afterwards. If you have severe allergic reactions to food or oral medication or pets or seasonal allergies or something else that's severe, you can still go ahead and get your vaccine safely and just be monitored. Next, please. So this is where I want to address some special populations. So as is usual in clinical trials, pregnant women are often excluded, and for obvious reasons. But there are plenty of people that became pregnant, plenty of women who became pregnant on the clinical trials. And there was no adverse effect seen, although those specific clinical trials are still pending, and we're hoping to have that data later this year. So the recommendation is that if you are pregnant or you're lactating, then, and specifically if you're in one of the higher priority groups, you really should consider getting vaccinated. And the reason why you should, and the recommendation is that you should, is because we know what happens if you have COVID. So we've all seen terrible things with COVID this year. We've all seen that pregnant women in particular have an increased risk of severe outcomes for themselves and their fetuses. And so everything in medicine is what's the risk, what's the benefit? So here you've got a vaccine that's safe, very effective, seems to be safe in pregnant women. And there's no sort of theoretical reason why it should affect pregnant women more or differently than anybody else, because again, that messenger RNA doesn't get anywhere near the human DNA. So the recommendation is to go ahead and get it. There have now been a lot of thousands of pregnant women who've received the vaccine. And as I said, those final studies are pending. If you are pregnant or lactating, please, and you have concerns, please talk to your doctor. That person will be able to give you the most accurate, up-to-date information. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, or ACOG, came out with guidelines that really mirror what the CDC and ACIP came out with, which is that you really should consider getting it because of the severe outcomes. I just want to go back to those wishing to conceive. There's a lot of data out there, There's a lot of news out there, which is not correct. It's fake news, that it may affect fertility. There's absolutely no data to support that. There's no waiting period till conceiving. I don't know any vaccine for that matter that affects fertility or that you need to wait for. So those are two important things to know. Let's see. And oh, that's right. You don't need to check if you're pregnant before you get the vaccine, again, because there are currently no safety concerns or efficacy concerns. But again, the benefit of the vaccine clearly outweighs the risk of COVID. Next, please. So one group that often can't get vaccines are immunocompromised people. So people who have diseases that tamp down their immune system, older people, as you get older, your immune system isn't quite as good, or people that we give immunosuppressive medications to, like transplant recipients or people with autoimmune diseases or other things. So again, there's no safety issue. This is not a live vaccine. So normally we don't give live vaccines to these folks because they can get sick. In this case, remember, it's just that little spike protein genetic code. So it's not the whole virus, so it is safe. The only question is, will it be as effective if your immune system isn't as good? And we don't know that. And those studies are also pending. So it's certainly safe. And that's where that important herd immunity comes in. The more people that get immunized, if people are immunocompromised, have a less good response, then the people around them are protected and they're not likely to transmit COVID to them. And the same with autoimmune disease. There has been concern that it could trigger a disease flare. So the way that the mechanism that's been postulated for disease flare is through this cytokine response, which is when our immune system sees COVID, the infection or the vaccine, and then takes off and gets very excited and exuberant, and then attacks your own body. That's what an autoimmune disease is, basically. So we have a lot of data from COVID. Millions, as you know, millions and millions of people unfortunately had COVID. And what really causes harm during COVID is that cytokine response that is seen at about day 5 to 12, that period of time. That's when people tend to get sicker. And of those, there have been a lot of people with autoimmune diseases, and there's been no signal that those folks have a flare in their autoimmune diseases. So there's indirect data. And then there is also the fact that messenger RNA, again, doesn't get near the human DNA. And DNA seems to have an important role in autoimmune diseases. So we would tell people with autoimmune disease, even if you're on immunocompromising medications, go ahead and get your vaccine, because again, you're at higher risk of having trouble if you got COVID vaccine, depending on your medications. Next, please. Okay, so adverse reactions, it's all in the press. We all know about it, and we know a lot more about it than we did before. So there's really nothing that's come up unexpectedly about these vaccines. So before when we had the safety and efficacy data, we knew that a lot of people get side effects from these vaccines, and it's because of that little cytokine storm that people get. A lot of people do get some side effects, and most commonly is a sore arm. Some people get a low-grade fever. It's true that if you're younger, less than 55 for this, your immune system's more robust. And it's true that after second dose, you're more likely to get an adverse reaction. But it is also true that a very small minority of folks, so 98% of people, will be able to carry on the normal day's routine. Only 2% of people will feel sick enough that they can't do their usual activities and need to stay home or take something for it. The symptoms are really resolved remarkably quickly, usually in 48 to 72 hours, and they can be treated with Tylenol. We do recommend that you don't take Tylenol, what we call prophylactically, before the vaccine, because there's some small studies that may suggest that may blunt the immune response. But afterwards, if you get symptoms, it's absolutely fine to go ahead and take Tylenol. Next, please. Okay, so as I said, lots of people have local reactions, about 85% of people, so you can expect a sore arm. So I wouldn't weight lift with that arm. I'd get it in your non-dominant arm. If you're right-handed, get it in your left. Don't lift heavy things, so that'll make things worse, and you'll notice that your arm really hurts. A lot of people get a little bit of fatigue or headache. They might ache a bit or have some fever. So the question is, how do you tell if someone has COVID or just side effects from vaccine? Well, the vaccine won't give you shortness of breath or cough, won't give you any of that. And that funny loss of taste or smell that COVID infection has will not do that. So if you're in that window where you haven't reached maximal immunity yet, and you don't get better within 48 or 72 hours, or something the vaccine wouldn't give you, then you should get a COVID test, because you could still get COVID even after you've had 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine. Next, please. Okay, so a question that I got that was really a good one is that, again, if you have symptoms after being vaccinated, you're not contagious to anyone. This is not live vaccine. So this is just that spike protein. So what your symptoms are telling you is that your immune response is turned on by this vaccine, which is a great sign. And so that should be encouraging to you. Conversely, if you don't have a reaction, don't feel badly. Your immune system is still working. You're just not getting that storm that people get usually when they're a bit younger. So if people have COVID natural infection, the recommendation obviously is to wait until your symptoms resolve and come out of your isolation, because we don't want you infecting people who are immunizing you or other people in a clinic. Reinfection definitely occurs after first COVID infection, but it's quite rare before 90 days. So there's an option for folks to wait for 90 days if they feel like it. If they want to fully recover, whatever concerns they have, they can wait for 90 days because the risk is low, but it's still recommended they do get their vaccine. There's no preservatives or eggs in this vaccine, so there's no contraindication with those allergies. And the other little caveat is if you get another vaccine, say you're due for your shingles shot or you're due for your flu shot, we want you to wait 14 days between the doses. And the reason for that, again, is not a safety concern. You're not going to come to harm, but it may not work as well. So we want you to wait the 14 days. And again, if you get monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma, which is used in treating mild COVID symptoms, it's recommended to wait 90 days. Again, not a safety issue, just a concern about antibody responses and confusion about response. Next, please. So the bad news is, or I guess the bad news, the temporary bad news is that after you get vaccinated, you still need to mask and social distance. And the reason for this is because there's still a lot of COVID out there. There are also, you don't know if you have one of the 95%ers or one of the 5%ers. And there's not recommended to check your antibodies afterwards because there are different antibody tests. And there are other tests that don't check for parts of your immune system that are important, like your T cells for immunity. So antibody testing does not give you the full response of whether or not you're safe. Also, as you have variants in the community, as the virus is multiplying millions of times, there are some vaccine strains that are more suitable for the virus maintaining itself, like the UK version, which is more infectious. So that's advantageous to the virus. And there are also probably going to be weaker strains of the virus where errors are made when it copies itself and they just die off because they're not as successful viruses, which success for viruses infecting more people. So right now, masking, social distancing, hand hygiene to protect yourself and others, because the other point we don't know yet, which is being studied, is if I get vaccine and I'm fully immunized, could I still, if I come in contact with someone with COVID, could I carry it in my nasal passages and then inadvertently infect somebody else? So that data is still ongoing. So all the masking, social distancing, hand hygiene is going to continue. It'll continue until the rate of COVID goes way down in the community, until we get most people vaccinated, that so-called herd immunity. So I would anticipate that'll go for at least through almost the end of 2021, if not longer. Next, please. We talked about the vaccine strains, and I just want to reiterate that there is urgency to getting your vaccine. So since some of these vaccine strains are more infectious, we are worried that they will become prevalent in the community. And some of them, like the South African strain, may be a bit less susceptible to the vaccine. So it's kind of a race to get vaccinated before these variants become more prevalent in the community so that you're protected. But even if that happens, these messenger RNAs are very easily adjustable. It doesn't take months and months to adjust. And I know that right now they're working on seeing if we need a booster vaccine for these mutant strains. But remember, even if there's less efficacy with vaccine, you're still probably getting a lot of efficacy, you're getting a lot of effect, even if, say, if you're infected with the South African strain. Because remember, the cutoff is 50% efficacy to make sure the vaccine was released. We've got 95% to play with. So you've got 40-something% to play with. So obviously we want the vaccine to be maximally protective, but these variants are a concern. And so we know there's been a lot of issues with supply and demand, which don't come from any healthcare system. Those are regulated by the government and the state allocation of vaccine. So hopefully over the next few weeks, there'll be a lot more vaccine available for everybody to get once we get through those priority groups.
And we do have a lot of questions. I hate to interrupt, but I know you've gone through a lot of your information here, and I want to make sure that we get to the questions. A lot of good information, a lot of valuable information for our community. Some of the questions we have here are just more to reiterate some of the information that you shared with us. So I know we had a couple of questions talking about how the vaccine might affect people who have certain existing medical conditions, or a stroke survivor, or maybe on other medications such as blood thinners or things like that. Is there anything that people need to be aware of, being on medication or off medication when they take the vaccine, or talking to their doctor, of things of that nature?
Yeah. So it's recommended you just take your normal vaccine, you take your normal medications. There's no contraindication. I would recommend that people do eat and drink before their vaccine, because a lot of people are, get a little lightheaded sometimes after vaccines. So you want to make sure you're well hydrated, you've had something to eat. As far as safety with autoimmune conditions or other things, those things like stroke and heart disease and respiratory illnesses, all those things, if you get natural COVID infection, you're likely to have a worse outcome. Same if you're of advanced age. So again, it's all risk benefit. The benefit of the vaccine far outweighs the harms.
And I believe you mentioned this, but I just wanted to reiterate, there was a question. Can you still get COVID-19 after you get the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine?
You can. Excuse me, you can. Because remember, no vaccine is 100% effective. So you don't know if you're in that 95% or that 5%. But if you're playing the odds, you're likely to be in the 95%. So you can. And you can also get it if you're in that period, that window period before you have maximal immunity. So you don't get immunity instantly. It takes a couple of weeks after each dose of vaccine to get the most immunity.
Okay. And is that why there's space in between getting like 1 dose and 2 dose? And what is that time period again?
Yeah, so no, that's not why. It's this time period is because that's how it was studied. Booster doses are usually given at some time frame, and that's how they were studied. So Pfizer's 21 days, Moderna's 28 days, again, plus or minus 4 days with that grace period. And if it goes further than that, there's no need to redose the first dose.
Okay. And then another question here is, why is the vaccine not recommended for children under 16 years old?
Just because it wasn't studied that way. So, when a vaccine is released, they do what was released in the large study where they studied thousands of people. Pediatrics are being studied right now. So kids are being studied because obviously we want to know if we can immunize kids. And hopefully that'll be available later this year. And then the emergency use authorization will probably be expanded. That's what we anticipate.
Okay. And can you just reiterate a little bit more of the information around if the vaccine is safe to take if you're trying to conceive or if you're pregnant and those concerns?
Yeah. So I know there's a lot of concern about that, and there should be. People are, thinking about conceiving, or there's 2 of you then. So yeah, there's no time period to wait. There's no fertility effect. I know it's all over social media. That's just, the data just doesn't support that. I'm not really sure where that arose from. I suspect it's got to do with the messenger RNA. This doesn't go through the DNA. it's a little hard to even think of a way that it would interfere with pregnancy. And there are some animal trials, those phase 1 trials, that didn't show any effect on fetuses. So again, I would encourage somebody in my life, my personal family member who was pregnant or wanting to conceive, to go and get your vaccine, because we don't want you to get COVID when you're pregnant, because your immune system is suppressed when you're pregnant. You don't want to get sick.
Sure. Now, if you get your first dose, like let's say I got my first dose yesterday, you know, should I go back to the same place I got that dose? Should I go somewhere else? Does it matter?
Yeah, so a lot of that has to do with vaccine allocations. So what most health systems are doing, what we're doing is we're going to make sure that a second dose of that same vaccine is arranged. So even though theoretically you could mix up Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, they weren't studied that way. So
Sure.
if you got Pfizer, we want to make sure you get a second dose of Pfizer. And I believe the health department's doing the same thing. So you should have an appointment made for your second dose wherever you go, and be all set for that when you're ready. There should be vaccine for you.
So then it's most likely that wherever I go for the first dose, I would probably go back there for my second dose.
Yep.
This same vaccine, Pfizer to Pfizer, Moderna to Moderna. Okay.
Right. Unless there was an allocation supply problem, in which case they would help arrange for you to get your second dose somewhere else.
And then it seems like we're getting this question a lot. I feel like we answered it, but what is the window in which like you have your maximum immunity after receiving the second shot?
No, it's a really good question. And everybody always wants to know that. It's the same for really any vaccine. So it's 2 to 3 weeks after your dose. So 2 to 3 weeks after your first dose. So you're getting maximum immunity to your first dose by the time your second dose is due with Pfizer, and then 2 to 3 weeks beyond that to get that additional bump.
Okay. And then also, you had mentioned about being monitored after you got your vaccine. Do you recommend a better type of location in order for you to feel like you're getting monitored better? Because I know there's all different sorts of setups of how people are getting the vaccine. So what would your recommendation be?
So the recommendation is that everybody should be doing monitoring. So what that looks like looks different in different places. So I know that the different counties, for example, are monitoring people in their cars, but they're really checking in on them to make sure they're okay. So in healthcare systems, you're monitored usually in a waiting room with a nurse just to make sure you don't have any adverse effects. So monitoring should be implied and specific for the site you're in. They will have thought that through because we're required to do the monitoring.
Okay. And then as we're just kind of wrapping up here, is there anything else that you really feel like, you know, you either want to reiterate or that you really feel like people should know about the vaccine?
I would just say these are safe and effective vaccines, and they are more effective than we ever dreamed possible. COVID, this is the light at the end of the tunnel. Nothing else is going to turn this epidemic around. So when you get an opportunity, please run and go and get your vaccine.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us and answering these questions. And I know we put some information in the chat box as well, how people can follow up on some of the questions. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Esperanza.
Thank you. Thank you again so much to Dr. Allison Weinman for being here with us today to share critical information and answer our questions about the COVID-19 vaccines. As a reminder, if you or someone else you know is experiencing a need, whether it's housing, utilities, food, diapers, or anything else that you are struggling with, our 211 helpline remains available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We maintain a running list of available resources in the community and can connect you to the support that you need. You can also look up resources in your area by using our 211 resource database at unitedwaysem.org/211. At this time, I'd like to share information about our next town hall. Please join us next Wednesday for updates on childcare, including safety, eligibility, and virtual opportunities. We will be joined by Kelly Gerlinger with Wayne Risa and a representative from Starfish Family Services. Please visit unitedwaysem.org/virtual town halls to sign up for alerts, find out about upcoming town halls, and to view our previous town halls. Thank you, everyone. Please continue to take care and stay safe.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.